History knows many kings, but only a select few changed the course of centuries. Among them was a woman whose will reshaped the destiny of an entire continent. Her name is Isabella of Castile, she who transformed fragmented Spain into a mighty empire, sent Columbus's ships to the New World, and forever etched herself into the annals of power, faith, and incredible ambition. But beyond the crown, beyond the glory of a conqueror, who was she truly? A daughter rejected by her mother, a wife who ruled alongside her husband, or a Catholic queen whose religious intolerance left a bloody mark on history? Welcome, friends and guests of the channel. We are in the labyrinth of time, and to understand Isabella, let's journey to 1451, to a small town in ancient Spain, Madrigal de las Altas Torres, where a girl was born who was destined to turn the world upside down. Isabella, Queen of Castile and Leon, wife of Ferdinand II of Aragon, whose dynastic marriage initiated the unification of Spain into a single state. She was the daughter of King John II of Castile from his second marriage. After her father's death in 1454, Isabella's older brother, Henry IV, became King of Castile. However, due to his inability to produce offspring, this ruler was nicknamed the Impotent. The king married a second time to Joanna of Portugal, sister of King Afonso Efem of Africa, who it was said remained untouched after the first wedding night and soon took Beltrán de la Cueva as her lover. The girl born to her, Joanna, was perceived by many as the fruit of adultery and was nicknamed La Beltraneja, in honor of her supposed father. The king also divorced his second wife. These factors, King Henry's impotence, Queen Joanna's infidelity, and the questionable origin of her daughter Joanna, made the issue of succession urgent. The nobility forced King Henry to name his younger brother Alfonso as heir. The king initially agreed, assuming Alfonso would marry his daughter Joanna, but after some time, he changed his mind. The Cortes, taking control of Alfonso and proclaiming him king in Avila, entered into a struggle with King Henry, and all of Castile was divided into two hostile camps. The northern provinces supported Henry, and the southern provinces supported Alfonso. A year later, at the age of 14, Alfonso died, and the hopes of the rebellious nobles focused on Isabella. But she rejected their overtures, remaining loyal to her brother, and he officially proclaimed her heir to the throne in 1468, signing the Treaty of the Bulls of Guisando, by virtue of which Isabella was recognized as heir to the throne, Princess of Asturias. Furthermore, the king pledged not to force her into a marriage she did not desire, and she pledged not to marry without her brother's consent. Thus, for the sake of establishing stability in the kingdom and preventing a new civil war, the king disregarded his official daughter, Joanna. Henry IV attempted to marry his sister Isabella off, offering her several candidates, but she rejected his options, secretly marrying Ferdinand, Prince of Aragon. Isabella, Queen of Castile, and Leon, who can be compared to Catherine the Great and Peter the Great, Russian czars, in one person. Thanks to her, a unified and strong state began to exist on the world map, which we now know as modern Spain. Her strong marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon, who was her third cousin, led to the unification of Castile and Aragon into one kingdom, from which the strengthening and beginning of the reign of the kings of Spain started. Isabella, daughter of John II, King of Castile, and his second wife, Isabella of Portugal, was not prepared to govern the country. So she did not receive a proper education and spent her childhood away from the palace. But fate and history decided her future otherwise. Isabella, a devout Catholic at the age of 18, secretly married Ferdinand of Aragon, and at just 23 years old, ascended the throne of a declining Castile and Leon. After the death of her elder and childless brother, Henry IV, and just 2 years later, Isabella implemented crucial financial and administrative reforms. She established the first police force in Europe and a series of laws that reliably protected the interests of Spanish subjects. She also restored discipline at court. In the pivotal year of 1492, Isabella achieved the most important goal for Spain's future. She led the Spanish kingdom to its final liberation from the Arab Caliphate, completing the Reconquista, which had lasted 7 centuries. The initiative for the marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon came from Archbishop Alfonso Carrillo de Acuña of Toledo. The marriage to 17-year-old Ferdinand took place on October 19, 1469, presumably in Valladolid. Today, Valladolid is a city in northwestern Spain, one of the country's main historical and cultural centers. From the 11th to the early 15th century, Valladolid served as the seat of the court of Castilian and Spanish monarchs. Currently, it is the administrative center of the province of the same name within the autonomous community of Castile and Leon. However, there is another version that the marriage took place in the Alcazar of Segovia. The Alcazar of Segovia is a palace and fortress of the Spanish kings in the historic part of the city of Segovia. It is located on a rock at the confluence of rivers, and this location on the rock makes it one of the most beautiful and recognizable palaces in Spain. The Alcazar was initially built as a fortress, but served as a royal palace, state prison, and royal artillery academy. Thus the marriage was secret. King Henry did not give his permission for it. The groom's retinue arrived in Castile disguised as merchants. Furthermore, since the bride and groom were third cousins, permission from the Pope was required, and the necessary document was fabricated, and permission was obtained retroactively. Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Aragon by virtue of the marriage contract, pledged to live in Castile, observe the laws of the country, and undertake nothing without Isabella's consent, thus becoming a prince consort or prince spouse to the future queen. Upon learning of this, Henry declared his sister to have violated the agreement, and for this reason stripped of the throne, declaring Joanna as his heir. And although Henry later reconciled with his sister and recognized her union with Ferdinand, after Henry's death, the succession situation became contentious. Isabella proclaimed herself queen on December 13, 1474, in Segovia. Joanna's supporters rose to defend her rights, thus beginning a civil war in which King Afonso of Portugal, Joanna's uncle, intervened. He married Joanna in 1475 as justification for his claims to Castile and the restoration of the legitimate Queen of Spain to her throne. However, this marriage was later annulled by the Pope due to close kinship. At the time of Isabella's proclamation as queen, Ferdinand was in Aragon and was proclaimed only as the queen's lawful husband, not king. This greatly offended him and put their marriage at risk. By signing an agreement in Segovia, the issue of governing powers in the Kingdom of Castile was settled between the spouses, and Ferdinand became king co-ruler with his wife, receiving broad governing powers from the Cortes. It was stipulated that the governance of the state should belong exclusively to Isabella, that Ferdinand could participate in it only as her authorized representative, that acts of appointment and judicial sentences should be made in the names of both spouses, and that their names should be minted on coins, but the treasury and army of Castile and Leon should remain at Isabella's exclusive disposal. Nevertheless, both kingdoms continued to maintain autonomy. Their institutions of power, as well as other social and economic structures, were completely separate. In Castile and Aragon, different languages were even spoken. Isabella, together with her husband, first and foremost, suppressed the ongoing civil strife over the succession, which was complicated by the invasion of Castile by the Portuguese king Afonso X, who supported the rights of his niece and at the same time, wife, Joanna. The struggle continued until October 1479, and a papal message, which annulled the previously issued permission for Afonso and Joanna's marriage, definitively undermined the claims of the contenders to the Castilian throne. Furthermore, Seeing the futility of attempts to advance significantly into Castile, and having been repulsed twice by Castilian troops loyal to Isabella, Afonso V decided to end this war and concluded a peace treaty, renouncing his claims to the Castilian throne. Isabella was known for her intelligence, energy, and unyielding character, distinguished by her persistence, piety, and self-confidence. Strong and determined, Isabella was self-educated. She spent time either on campaigns, where she often commanded detachments herself, while on horseback, or in her study, where she engaged in reading and drafting state papers with her secretaries. Embroidery remained her favorite pastime and a respite from state affairs. In the Queen's appearance, her greenish-blue eyes were particularly striking. Her complexion was delicate, her hair golden, her height not tall, and her physique not particularly graceful. Nevertheless, it was noted that her appearance possessed innate nobility and dignity. She became famous as a very devout Catholic, whose reign would be remembered by descendants for the persecution of Moors and Jews. Her goal was to cleanse Spain of pseudo-Christians, meaning non-believers who had been baptized merely for show, to execute and convert them to Christianity, for which she earned the nickname Isabella the Catholic. During her reign, the largest number of Jews left Spain. It was she who was at the forefront of creating the Spanish Inquisition, which she headed together with her husband, fighting for religious unity within the country. In 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella ordered the creation of enclosed quarters for non-believers, which were later called ghettos. This segregation, common for that time, also contributed to increased pressure on Jews and Muslims through higher taxes and social restrictions. Ultimately, in 1492, by the Alhambra Decree, Spanish Jews were given 4 months by the monarchs to convert to Catholicism or leave Spain. 10,000 Jews emigrated from Spain to Portugal, North Africa, Italy, and the Ottoman Empire. Later in 1492, Ferdinand wrote a letter to the Jews who had left Castile and Aragon, inviting them to return to Spain only if they became Christians. During her almost 30-year eventful reign, Isabella managed to elevate the royal power of Castile to an unprecedented height. The self-will of the Castilian grandees and the independence of cities were severely restricted by the introduction of the Hermandad. The Holy Hermandad, or literally Holy Brotherhood, was an armed organization for maintaining public order that existed in the cities of medieval Spain and was most widespread in Castile. In medieval Spain, kings often lacked the ability to provide adequate protection, so throughout the 10th century, municipal self-defense forces were created to protect against bandits and other criminal elements, as well as against the lawlessness of the nobility or to support a particular claimant to the throne. These organizations were temporary, but over time they became permanent structures in Spanish life. The first known instance of the creation of hermandades is related to the combined efforts of townspeople and peasants in the north of the country to protect the pilgrim route. Throughout the Middle Ages, similar brotherhoods were often created by city residents to protect the roads connecting them. Hermandades were also used from time to time to achieve political goals. They often operated on the principle of the Vehmic courts of Germany. The most powerful were the Leagues of Hermandades in northern Castile. One of their first decisions after the War of Castilian Succession was for Ferdinand and Isabella to establish a centralized Holy Hermandad, endowing it with enormous powers and heading it. They adapted already existing forms of hermandades to create police forces under the command of officials whom they themselves appointed, granting them the broadest powers, even in matters of state importance. The old hermandades continued to serve as local police units until they were finally disbanded in 1835. The Holy Hermandad was very skillfully used by the Catholic monarchs to form a special police militia, exclusively subordinate to them. First, they made the Hermandad compulsory, even where it did not exist in Castile, and the brotherhood soon spread to Aragon. Ferdinand used the Hermandad to fight the feudal lords who had long refused to recognize the royal municipal police, but in the end they submitted. From 1498, Ferdinand completely expelled all traces of former elected city officials from the Holy Hermandad and subordinated it directly to the central government. The tax that ensured the Brotherhood's existence remained in full force. Roads became safer, which immediately affected trade relations. Subsequently, the Holy Hermandad contributed to the decline of the Cortes. It was also one of the main instruments of royal arbitrariness and a tool of the Inquisition, in whose history the reign of Ferdinand and Isabella constitutes an entire era. Let me explain who the Cortes were. Cortes, translated from Spanish, means courts. In medieval Spain, these were regional, estate-based representative assemblies. The first Cortes were established in 1137 in Castile, and initially only nobles and clergy could participate in the Cortes. Burghers could only gain representation in the Cortes in 1188. What did the Cortes do? The Cortes had long participated in legislation, so under Isabella's rule, the Cortes increasingly lost their independence and submitted to royal absolutism. The three spiritual chivalric orders of Castile suffered the same fate after Isabella made her husband their grand master. In regional affairs, Isabella sought to limit the dependence of the Castilian Church on the Roman Curia and further subordinate it to royal authority. With Isabella's easy hand, the Castilian language, precisely the one studied all over the world today and considered the standard Spanish language, became the main language of Spain. She amassed a unique library and encouraged the printing of books and dramaturgy. It was not without her patronage that Christopher Columbus discovered America, which marked the global expansion of Spanish culture beyond the Spanish kingdom. In the last years of her life, Isabella transformed from a legendary heroine into a melancholic recluse. She became slow and gloomy. Of her 4 daughters, the eldest had died, the youngest was far away in England, the third in Portugal, and the 4th, Joanna, the most beautiful and spiritual, was soon destined to go mad. Isabella died in 1504, leaving her daughter Joanna, already suspected of mental instability at the time, as heir to all her possessions. Therefore, special conditions were stipulated in the will. Isabella is buried in the Royal Chapel, the burial place of the Catholic monarchs, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, adjacent to the Granada Cathedral. Granada was the last city on the Iberian Peninsula to remain in Moorish possession. Its surrender to the Catholic monarchs on January 1492 ended the centuries-long Reconquista and became an important milestone in the reign of the monarchs, who not only settled in the luxurious palace of the Islamic rulers, the Alhambra, but also wished their remains to be buried in this city. The order for this was given on September 13, 1504. The construction of the Royal Chapel took place between 1505 and 1517. The chapel is dedicated to Saints John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. The construction of the Royal Chapel lasted 12 years, and Queen Isabella died before the construction was completed. King Ferdinand died several years later, also without seeing the building finished. Their bodies found temporary rest in the monastery of San Francisco, from where they were transferred for reburial in 1521. In addition to the Catholic monarchs, the chapel also holds the remains of their second daughter, Queen Joanna the Mad, and her husband, Philip the Handsome. Isabella died by modern standards very young, at the age of 53. Her ashes rest in the Cathedral of Granada, the city that Isabella last liberated from the Caliphate and that preserves her glory as a liberator. More than half a millennium has passed since then, but for modern Spaniards, the Catholic monarchs, as Isabella and Ferdinand were called, are an object of veneration for their true service to the Catholic faith and devotion to Spain.